Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for taking the time to join us. Welcome to the NorthStar Café. I'm your host, Meenakshi Iyer, founder and principal of NorthStar Solutions and Services. And this is our uh, we haven't been together, I think, in a few months. So I'm really pleased to be back here and then really happy to have a special guest with us today, Brandi Olson. Brandi is the CEO of Real Work Done, and she's the author of a fantastic book called Real Flow: Break the Burnout Cycle and Unlock High Performance in the New World of Work. Brandi, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
You're welcome. I'm so excited to be here and to have this conversation together.
Absolutely. And I know that you and I have connected via LinkedIn through common friends a couple of years ago or so. And then we've been in conversation. And I know I've absolutely enjoyed watching your journey and then the book. And I know it's coming out tomorrow. Yeah.
Yes, official release day is tomorrow.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Yeah, and so this when I first learned about your book and we started talking about uh, when I joined your book squad, I know I could have been I would love to be more active than I am, but this was one idea that I had. Oh, this would be a perfect fit for the North Star Cafe, which is a live stream space that's really meant for dedicated to having action-oriented conversations on leadership development at the intersection of people, process, and technology. And that's something that I focus on in my work at NorthStar and in my work with individual clients and organizational clients. So this was just perfect with your book and the topic that you've been about. And just I wanted to introduce you really quickly to folks that are watching us live right now. So we are live on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And then those of you that will watch the recording replay later on. Those of you that are here right now, let us know where you are joining us from. Hi, Poonam. And let us know how you learned about us and what are you really looking forward to gaining from today's conversation. Please pop that into your chat, and we'll keep looking at the chat as well. So, Brandi is an organizational agility expert. She's the founder and CEO of Real Work Done, which is a consultancy dedicated to serving leaders through agile transformation, organizational transformation, strategy and team design, and executive coaching. Brandi has spent more than 2 decades consulting with organizations across diverse sectors, from nonprofits to universities to global Fortune 50 companies. That's such a fantastic range. I'm really excited. Yeah, I'm really excited to learn more from you today. Brandi, as an expert in organizational learning and change, she teaches leaders how to solve problems and adapt fast with high performing teams. And in the book, as we know, as we just talked about, it's called Real Flow: Break the Burnout Cycle and Unlock High Performance in the New World of Work. So, having said all that, Brandi, and I know you had a link to the book, so let me pop that in the chat. It's called Real Flow, realflow.com slash realworkflow.com slash book.
Realworkdone.com. Oh, I wrote it wrong. There you go. I wrote the link wrong for you. So it's realworkdone.com/book, because I've got real work done and real flow and all of those words start to jumble together. But I will say, gosh, what a lovely introduction. And thank you so much for offering that. The word real just shows up in my work all the time because it's kind of what drives my work, which is that if the work we're doing matters, and I believe that many of us are engaged in work that is important because we're solving real problems for other people and for ourselves and for the clients and companies and customers that we serve. And I think that if the work we're doing matters, we have to do it in reality. And that's why I talk about real things a lot, or reality, right? Because it doesn't matter how pretty something thing might look on a page, or how nice the plan is, or how beautiful the org chart is, or how perfect our like capacity management system is, right? If it doesn't actually match reality, we're not going to get any good work done. And so if we want to get good work done, the only place that we can do good work is in reality, which tends to be messy, highly inconvenient, unpredictable, and not something that we can easily like fit in a nice, neat and tidy box. And yet it's the only place that we get to show up and do work. So that's why I use the word real a lot. And something that just drives everything that I do is that real deep belief that reality is what we have. So we can get a whole lot more done the sooner we embrace reality and figure out how to do better work there, rather than trying to bend reality to fit some fictitious version of what a perfect organization or team looks like.
That's so well said, Brandi. Can you tell us, before we start talking about the book, can you tell us about how you got around to, what's your journey been to doing the kind of work that you're doing today?
Yeah, I would be happy to share about that. So my background long ago was in education. So I used to be a high school special ed teacher. Before that, I led wilderness trips and took college students out to the woods on canoe trips for weeks at a time, and then taught for many years as a public school teacher. And for the last 15 years or so have been doing the work I do now with organizations. But the thing that ties the line between like leading backpacking trips and teaching high school special ed, and now the work that I do teaching leaders and organizations, is both that one, it's like messy reality is part of all of it. Is how do we actually function, show up, and work in that reality? And then how do we learn together? And I would say like what my core expertise is in is how do we learn better together? And I really believe that in the world and dynamics that we all live and work in, the only competitive advantage, the only way that we're actually going to succeed as organizations is if we can learn better, faster, more effectively together. And that thread, how do we learn together, how to do better, is the thing that has always tied my work together. And I've been fortunate enough and to be able to do that work with a lot of different organizations and companies, like you mentioned, right? Like nonprofits and NGOs and universities and large global financial institutions. And the thing that they all have in common is that they're all trying to get important work done. There's an abundance of important work to do. And turns out all of those organizations have people at the center of them trying to work better together to solve complex problems and to respond to the change that is unrelenting and happening all around us. And so while the structure or the sector of those organizations might wind up looking very differently, at the core, people showing up trying to figure out how to do better work together. And that's what ties a wide variety of organizations together.
Absolutely. It's always the people. The other day I was talking to a senior leader who said, technology problems, they can look like they're technology problems, but at the root of it, it's always a people challenge that we have to work through. And it's so true. So in terms of this book, Real Flow, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions around this. First of all, just the title and how it ties to all of the other work that you do is just phenomenal. And you have a background as a human-centered design practitioner, expert, and also lean and agile. And that's another intersection that I find, or parallels that I find between how you and I and how we work. And so that's intriguing. So the title is very intriguing to me. So I wanted to ask you how you arrived at the title, Real Flow. How did you get into that?
Yeah, so the title Real Flow definitely is a nod to and leans into that idea of flow that comes out of lean thinking and agile thinking. But it's also the idea that like flow is what we experience when we're working hard, but we're able to work with ease. And when creativity emerges in unexpected places, and while we have tough problems to solve and the work is complex and it changes all the time, the collaboration isn't the hard part. And I think that describes what flow feels like. In reality, when the work flows through our organizations, it flows in ways that is unimpeded, right? We get things done, we get value from those things, and we get to move on to the next thing. And I think that's really in contrast to what a lot of organizations experience, which I talk about as flood. Flood is what happens when the work is fast and the pace is unrelenting, but instead of flowing, we're stuck, right? And it feels out of control, and we aren't able to navigate the work or be in control. We're just constantly reacting. And when we live in that like flood of work, we're not able to do very good work. So the title of Real Flow is the idea of what's the opposite of the flood, right? Like, what does it actually look like when we're working in ways that allow us to achieve higher performance and honor and work within our human selves, and what's capable or what we are capable of when we have that experience. That's the flow. And the real part, I think, I already talked about, right? It's the reality. In reality, how does that show up? Not on paper, not in somebody's theory, but like in the real ways that we show up and do work every day. How do we experience flow of performance and outcomes through our organization? So that's where the title Real Flow came from. And then I spent a lot of time really thinking about the other words that you get to use, right? Because when you write a book, you get lots of words in the book, but on the cover, you only get a few words. And I really wanted to frame up the conversation around burnout and high performance as coming together. And I think that those are two things that any of us who lead organizations or are part of teams, like we experience this tension between burnout, overwork, and how that impacts our performance. But I think many times we feel like we don't want to dive into those conversations because it almost, I think there's a worry that the solution will have to be doing less, or the solution will have to be lowering expectations. And if you're leading an organization that has an abundance of important work to do, doing less, lowering expectations, accepting lower quality, less outcomes just isn't an option. And I don't think that we need to lower expectations or do less to break that burnout cycle, to unlock higher performance. So I wanted to bring all of those things together in the title of the book to suggest that perhaps there's a different way forward, and perhaps there's some alternative ways of looking at how we manage our work and choose our work that might be more human, and not only be more human, but lead to better outcomes and lead to that like higher performance that we all know is really important and that we're all after.
Right. That was fantastic. And I could see like this word cloud emerging, and then how you strung all those words together in such a meaningful way. And that's the other thing that I've noticed in your work, in your posts and in your conversations. You often talk about bringing back humanity into the world of work and business. So I want to actually, I have a question that I want to tie to that is, if you were to make a pitch to a CEO or any CXO about what you talk in the book, and if you were to make a business case for that, tied to your fundamental belief around humanity, bringing back humanity in work, how would you do that?
Yeah, I think that it comes right back to higher performance, and that humanity isn't a liability that gets in the way of higher performance, but being human, showing up as real humans is the only path to the higher performance that our organizations are actually capable of. And that cuts against a lot of commonly held beliefs and assumptions about what an organization ought to look like, and how an organization ought to function. And many of those assumptions and beliefs about how organizations ought to function resemble a whole lot more of the idea that we're just a machine, right? That if every part of the machine is well-oiled and efficient, it will all add up to a machine that somehow is capable of the performance that we want or doing the things that we want. But that just doesn't match with reality. And so if we are constantly trying to work in that paradigm of our organizations are just really well-oiled machines, we're constantly going to be fighting against what's really possible. So I come all the way back around to the value proposition. I would say working in that way, right? Working in a flood of competing priorities and a flood of organizational multitasking. That's the word I use to talk about how and what happens when groups of people are pursuing too many things at the exact same time. When we're caught in that flood, it has a much higher cost than shows up on the balance sheet. And I think one of the things that happens is we just look at all the work that we're trying to do and all the competing priorities that we're trying to do. And if you're the CEO of that company or you're the division leader, you know that that work has to get done. And so you have to try to figure out ones that are doing that work to somehow accomplish that goal. And the way that we often go about it is we just try to slice ourselves into thinner percentages of capacity and time. And in doing so, we're actually diminishing the performance that we're capable of. And we're causing burnout, and we're causing turnover. We're causing problems and challenges with quality, and we're causing organizations that have a hard time responding to change. So these things that we know make a really big difference in our overall performance and how we sustain our performance over time and our bottom line, like our agility, our ability to respond to change, our innovation, the creativity with which we can tackle complex problems, creating organizations that have diversity and equity. All of those things are essential to high performance, and all of those things are harder and more challenging to achieve when we're stuck in that flood of organizational multitasking and competing priorities. And so it's about seeing the links and the connections. It's not about lowering our expectations. In fact, I would say most companies are settling for expectations that are far too low already. We're settling for a lower level of performance and a lower level of quality than we're truly capable of, because we're working in this way that is so antithetical to how humans do good work.
So much wisdom there. So much wisdom there. I loved what you talked about. The piece around sustainability, right? What we do, and the sustainability, agility, and these are so critical to continuing to do the good work that we want to do or we've been doing. I'm just seeing a question here, I think. Let me see. So, hey, Sajid. So he says, targets keep adding up. The key is to celebrate small wins together, pat each other's back, motivate and lift each other to reach larger goals. Thank you. Thank you for that, Sajid. Would you like to add anything to that, Brandi?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the piece that jumps out to me is that idea of celebrating small wins, but also like within that is recognizing that like the path forward is not like a big cataclysmic change, right? Like when we start to see the way that competing priorities and organizational multitasking and overwork like start to stack up, the cost that really comes from working in that way, when you have teams and teams of people across an organization that are stuck in that flood, working really ineffectively, once you start to see it, it can feel overwhelming, right? The change can feel really daunting. And so and when the work is important, right? Like when there's an abundance of important work, it can feel like we can't afford to change the way we're doing things, right? Well, the status quo may not be working. It's at least known and it's at least comfortable. So like coming back to that idea of like small wins and lifting each other up to reach the larger goals, that's where it starts, right? There's the Kanban principle of start where you're at, right? And agree to start where you're at. And that idea that we start where we're at and we take the next better step forward. And I think that not only do I think, like I know, because I've seen it happen over and over again that it's those small next better steps forward that actually lead us to better learning and a faster outcome, right? So even though we take these series of small steps, it actually gets us where we want to go faster, more so than taking these giant, huge changes where we try to rearrange everything and get totally overwhelmed. When we do that, we miss out on the learning that comes from those small steps. True. And so the faster way to the outcome we want, which is a high performing organization filled with teams of people who are able to show up and do good work sustainably and deliver great outcomes, the fastest way to get there is through those small steps and that small next better action that's right in front of us. And I think when we do that, right, it stacks up to the actual goal that we want. And in reality, right, where it actually stacks up and makes a difference in the real world.
Mm-hmm. And it's so true. And what struck me just now, Brandi, is that taking those small steps and working in that fashion can deceptively look very like a lengthy process, like it takes too long, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, I worked with an organization a few years ago, and I was working with the chief technology officer, and he was really trying to move forward organizational agility and particularly like product thinking across the business. And so he was the CTO trying to influence his business partners to help them understand why a product mindset and why organizing their work around customer-centric products would lead to better outcomes. And so he knew that that's where he wanted to go. But he was stuck in this kind of flooded approach in which he still was looking at the organization just as a machine, even though he wanted his business partners to think about it differently. But the thing that struck me the most was he said to me in a conversation one time, he said, "We don't have time to get together and have conversations about this. We don't have time for that. We just need a playbook. So we don't have time to actually get everybody aligned. I just need you to help me write the playbook so that everybody knows what to do." And that like line of thinking has always just stuck with me, that we don't have time to get aligned. He said those exact words. And I think that's like goes right to your point that it feels like that's going to take longer, or he felt like it was going to take longer. And yet we all know, like we can hear that and we all know like, goodness, things are not going to go faster if nobody's aligned, and you're not going to get alignment by sending everybody a playbook deck, right? So if that's your problem, that you don't have alignment and agreement around the outcomes that you want, you can't cut short that work and you can't bypass that learning, even though it would be much more convenient if you could. Like like that would be great if you could send everybody out a deck and they'd get aligned and on the same page and moving forward together. But you know, that pesky reality thing, that's just not how it works.
I love that, the pesky reality.
It's yes,
it is
pesky.
So true.
I also talk about, right, like it's inconvenient. It would be easier if everything worked like a well-oiled machine. It certainly would be, but it's certainly harder to try to like turn ourselves into machines than it is to just accept that we're human and we work in particular ways and we're capable of solving complex problems and being incredibly innovative in particular ways that happen to be sometimes inconvenient with the way we're kind of told an organization ought to function.
What came up to me was, let's just accept that we are human. And, you know, when you were saying that, what also came up for me was a lot of our, actually almost all of our modern day work practices, not only just our work, but be it agriculture, education, most of our large systems are rooted in the industrial age. And so everything is about yield and productivity. And I know we have an upcoming conversation later this week where you will be talking about that as well. And so how do you, this is like a follow-up to my earlier question around the business case to a CXO. How do you what are you hoping that CXOs and executive leaders walk away from your book?
Yeah, I hope that what leaders walk away from the book with is an understanding of the responsibility they have to shape their organizational environment, and how in focusing on shaping their environment, their ecosystem, the way that work is chosen and flows through the organization, that they can regain control and regain confidence in the outcomes. And I think that if, I really think about the many leaders that I work with, one of the things that keeps them up at night is this feeling of being out of control, and the feeling that it's all coming so fast and it matters so much. And yes, they want to lead organizations of happy, healthy humans, but they feel like I don't know that they would articulate it in this way, but kind of deep inside is this feeling that like that's inherently at odds with the performance outcomes that they're accountable for. And the stakes are so high. And what I really want leaders to understand is, one, they have a responsibility to create and design an organization that doesn't burn people out. And there's some real practical ways that they can do that don't require them to lower expectations, that don't require them to, have meditation Mondays for everyone, as nice as that might be. That there's very practical, very concrete actions that they can take about how they choose their work and how they prioritize their work that can have a very significant impact on how people show up and do good work. And so it's not about lowering expectations, not about accepting lower levels of performance or productivity. And it's not about being out of control, that you can, in fact, be in control as a leader. You can't be in control of all the change that's going to happen. You can't predict every single thing that's going to come your way, but you can be in control of the flow of work through your organization, the flow of priorities and prioritization. And it doesn't require you to do less, to accept less, to be a lower performer, or to accept any of that from your team. So that's really what I want leaders to walk away with, is an understanding that while these problems are challenging, they're not as hard to solve as sometimes it seems. And they're not intractable challenges. And we can make some small but significant shifts in our organizations that have really dramatic and outsized outcomes, both in how we show up as humans and in the outcomes that those humans accomplish together.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And this makes me wonder, what was your, what made you want to write a book about this?
So I didn't know that I wanted to write a book about it for a long time, but I just started trying to, in connecting with the leaders I was working with and the teams I was working with, help them understand like how their brains work as human beings, right? So it started with conversations around like, why are you exhausted at the end of a day when you've been in back-to-back meetings? I was working with one leader in particular, and she was just talking about how she felt like exhaustion was just the price she had to pay to be a high performer. That was just the cost of being at the top of her field, at the top of her game. And that she worried, right, that her exhaustion, her fatigue, her feeling of overwork was perhaps an indication that she wasn't the high performer that she wanted to be. And in those conversations, and then working with more of the teams at that organization and others, started to see and understand that most of us don't really understand what's happening in our own brains when we are going from meeting to meeting, or when we are pursuing 10 number one priorities at the same time. And so we needed to better understand, how do our brains actually function when we're context switching all day? What's actually going on? Because we have this perception that being a great multitasker is a badge of honor, that it's an indicator that we're a high performer. And in reality, those things are just like illusions around what high performance actually looks like, and work very much against how our brains work. So I started, teaching that more, drawing pictures about what's happening in your brain. Like, let's understand something called executive function and how the reality is that your brain can only perform one executive function at a time. And so I was doing a lot of teaching around this. I was speaking on this and had a talk that I was doing, start less, finish more. And then a friend of mine, Neil, he asked me one day, he's like, Brandi, like, you're so passionate about this and I don't get it. Like, why do you care so much about organizational multitasking? I don't understand why you're so passionate about this. So I really, like, I took a step back and I really paused, and I realized that the reason I care about it so much is because too often we leaders, organizations put people in positions where they have to choose between doing great work and their own humanity and their own well-being. Like that leader who is like, exhaustion's just the price to pay for being a high performer. Too often we put people in that position where they have to choose. And I believe in most circumstances, that's a false choice. That the reason people wind up having to choose between doing great work and their own well-being and humanity is because of the way we design our organizations and the way that we pursue competing priorities and organizational multitasking, right? But unless you work for an NGO like Doctors Without Borders, where you are literally being asked to go into conflict zones and put your life on the line, self-sacrifice doesn't need to be part of what it means to do good work. And most of us should never have to make those choices. In fact, the way to do great work is to show up and be real humans with well-being and that aren't burned out. So that's ultimately why I started writing about this, because I thought that there's some things that we're missing in the conversation about burnout. We can talk a lot about burnout, but we rarely talk about what a leader's role is in creating an organization that doesn't burn people out. Too often we put the onus of burnout on the individual because it shows up as an individual experience, right? And so if I'm feeling burned out, then I need to figure out work-life balance and figure out what I'm saying yes to and what I'm saying no to and how to manage it all. When in reality, that's just me trying to deal with the symptoms of it, right? And we don't talk enough about the way that leaders, the responsibility leaders have to create organizations that just don't burn people out. And that's the conversation I wanted to bring forward and why I spent a painstaking 2.5 years writing, and why I'm so excited and proud that the book is here and that we can start having conversations about how to do better work together. Because I think that matters so much.
Yeah, and your passion just clearly comes through. And it was so insightful what you said about burnout being made out to be this issue or a problem at an individual level, and we somehow have to figure out how to fix it. Whereas the environment and the systems are not really designed. They're designed to create or generate burnout or burn us out, right? So,
yes.
Yeah, what a great call out.
Yeah. Well, and I think that goes back to, you mentioned a few minutes ago how a lot of the way many of our organizations function, kind of has roots in the industrial era, and this idea that, well, machines work like this. Maybe people will work like machines, and a great organization should function like a machine. Well, if you've got a machine and a part burns out, you just replace it. And I think a lot of that mentality that still infuses so many of our organizations, even when those leaders know they don't have a machine and people are not machines, right? They want to do better. Those that mentality, those illusions just infuse our organizations. And so many organizations in their structure are designed to do exactly that, to burn people out and move on. And that, I don't know that has ever worked, but it certainly doesn't work in a world in which change is unrelenting and the challenges we're trying to solve are more complex than we've ever understood them to be before. And that reality definitely doesn't fit an organization that, whether by intention or just lack of intention, is burning people out. And that's what we have to bring more awareness to. So we're not just letting it happen, right? We're taking control and designing for a different outcome.
Designing for a different outcome. That's fabulous. And Yeah, and it just struck me when you said you said painstaking 2.5 years. That whole pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I started writing like the end of March, or no, the end of February 2020. I went on a writing retreat. And I was like, I'd gathered all my research. I'd like set aside a chunk of time so that I could write. And I thought I would just like knock this out in a couple of months. And got back from that writing retreat as pandemic was unfolding. And the world rapidly shifted, right? Like my kids were suddenly home from school.
Yeah.
I live in the Twin Cities. Our community was really reeling from police brutality and reckoning with, the racial intersection of how police treat people, the murder of George Floyd. And that like became all of 2020, right? It was like devoted to not writing my book, but like trying to navigate and just survive, right? And when I came back to the book towards the end of that year, I had to really like step back and say, is this still relevant? We don't live in the same world anymore. So is this conversation still relevant? And while I made adjustments and I definitely like shifted some of my my research and conversation, what I came to understand is that the pace of change isn't relenting, right? Like it's increasing. The importance of the work we're doing isn't going away. And one of the things that I think the pandemic has helped us to see is a heightened level of transparency in the ways that we work. And there's just no room for things that aren't effective. And I think that, brought me back to the book and brought me back to the writing process, that core belief that like, we just don't have time to waste. So we need to understand how we do good work. We need to recognize how the way we design organizations is getting in the way of that. We don't have time to waste. We don't have energy or capacity to waste. We only have capacity for the things that matter and add value. And that really infused my writing process and helped me to see that like these conversations still matter. And I think they still matter not because I've got some like line into relevance or like social trends. I think that they matter because the way we do good work now is the way we've always done good work, which is with people, right? Showing up to solve problems, right? It's how we show up, how we work together. And that is always going to be the future of work. And we can't afford to get that wrong.
So poignant there. And thank you for sharing your story and your experience at the time and during your entire journey of writing this book. I can understand and resonate with everything that was happening, and I didn't realize that you are in the Twin Cities, and that was so much happening at the time.
Yeah, we think about like we talk in organizational agility a lot about emerging priorities.
Yes,
and that was something that I had to recognize is like, there are some emerging priorities that put writing a book way down on the list.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. And I need to be able to be responsive and recognize that what's happening around me isn't about me, but I'm also part of it. And turns out that 3 or 4 months that I'd really carved out to have less client work and have all this time and space to write, I needed to use that elsewhere, right? Yeah. To be attentive to my family and my community. And it doesn't mean that I was less of a high performer because I didn't meet my writing goals then, which I really struggled with, right? If I were really focused, I'd be able to get up and write for the first 2 hours of every single day. No, I wasn't able to. And it's not because I wasn't a high performer or I wasn't focused. It's because I had a different set of priorities.
Yes.
And I needed to acknowledge that they'd shifted. And so even though writing a book was my number one priority for the year, it wasn't the number one priority, right, any longer. And as soon as I could accept that, I actually just put the book back on the shelf. I took it out of my work in progress. And I just put the writing process on the shelf because I didn't have capacity for that. And trying to squeeze it in was causing harm, both to myself and to the work that I needed to actually be focused on. You
had to practice a lot of what you write about in the book.
Oh my goodness, it's the worst. It's the worst to have to write about this stuff and then to have to practice it and then to know when I choose to like be in meetings all day long, know what I'm doing to myself, and have to deal, and have to deal with that. It's terribly inconvenient and really pushes me to, be retrospective internally in a way that, I'd prefer not to be. And yet here we are, right? Because I just am one whole human. As we
Yes,
all
and
are.
that's the reality, like you
Embrace
said,
it.
and it's messy.
It's messy, it's inconvenient, and yet it's the only place where work gets done.
Yeah, absolutely. As we begin to wrap up, I'm seeing there's a question here from Sajid. So, Gen Z versus millennials, is the threshold different for burnout? Or are millennials just born tougher, or is the world more harsher towards
Gosh,
Gen Z?
I love that question, right? And we've been having this cultural conversation around that, with this question around, the Great Resignation and quiet
Quiet
quitting.
quitting.
And here's what I would say. I am certainly not a sociologist or like expert. I'm sure there's a word for like people who study generational experiences. But I think what I will say is whether it's a generational thing or whether it's just a product of our time and place, I think that more and more people are less tolerant of sacrificing their humanity, right? Because we understand that if we burn out, we're not serving anybody. And that's not a heroic thing to do. And I do think there's probably some generational impacts there because it's really countercultural, especially in our Western society, right? It's really countercultural to say that perhaps I can do great work and I can be a high performer, but I don't have to sacrifice my well-being to do that. And I do think that pushes against some really deeply held beliefs that we collectively have about what it means to do good work and what it means to be important. And so, yeah, I mean, I hope, like, I've got little kids. I hope that they get to grow up in a world where they can make an impact, do good work, have pride in the work that they do, but also have a really holistic sense of like who they are in the world. And I think we'll probably see that more as that plays out. But I do think that mentality of like, you just got to suck it up and power through, it's short-sighted. And I think it's short-sighted for like, any generation. I think it's short-sighted to just see like high performance in the short term, right? And to not understand what the long game looks like. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think we're going to see a lot more commentary around that. And I hope we do, because I think these are valuable conversations to have.
Absolutely. So, Brandi, once again, thank you so much for your time. And before we wind up our conversation for today, any parting thoughts? How can people find you? Where can they get your book? Whole lot of questions.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I would love to connect with people here on LinkedIn. My favorite part about LinkedIn is the real people that show up and interact. And certainly that's how we have gotten connected. So it's a real gift to be able to connect here. I would love you to grab the book. It's available for pre-sale today. It officially releases tomorrow. Talk about being agile. I've learned this morning that there's some printing industry delays that are going to delay when people wind up getting the book. So I'm accepting that and pivoting. But you can put your order in. Digital copies are available tomorrow as well. realworkdone.com/book is where you can find it. It's also on Amazon. And I would also invite you to check out, we've got for today, if you buy it today still, a really great gift and bonus prioritization superpowers pack that you'll be able to receive if you buy the book in pre-sale. And then we've got some really awesome team bulk buy bonuses that are going to happen in October and November. So if you are part of a team that you think would benefit from having these conversations, I'd love for you to reach out about buying a set for your team and take advantage of some of the really cool bonuses that we're offering to encourage teams to have different conversations together. So you can see all of that at the website, realworkdone.com/book.
Great. And I just plugged that in the chat.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And Thank you to all those who watched us live, and to those who will watch the replay. And you know where to get hold of Brandi. So once again, thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Brandi, and wish you the best with the book, with the launch.
Thank you so much. And thanks for making space for this conversation. This is the part of writing a book that's really exciting, right? Because it's dynamic. No longer am I sitting on a computer screen by myself, nitpicking over word choice. We get to actually have conversations that are so much more valuable because more people are part of them. So thank you so much for this.
Absolutely. And one of my big takeaways was towards the end that you shared, that if you burn out, you don't serve anybody. And I think that's a big one. So find your flow, prevent burnout, and let's all bring the humanity back. And the other piece is really, I totally agree with you. The future work is human. I believe that it may reside at the intersection of people, process, and technology, but it is completely 100% human within the context of the larger ecosystem. So how timely that you've written this book and sharing your wisdom with all of us. Thank you so much, Brandi, and best wishes. And thank you, everyone.
And I look forward to connecting to everyone who watches the replay. Come find us and keep the conversation going.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.